All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Tonight, we're going to be talking about hypothesizing function. We've been leading up to this in the advanced bundle courses, working on your case study. We've been through collecting data and finding patterns. And tonight, we're going to pick up where we left off last week and go into hypothesizing functions from those patterns. There's my name and credentials at the bottom of the PowerPoint. You can look on the bacb.com to verify that I am who I am. It's good to have you here. I seem to always get a scratchy throat right when I get started. All right, let's jump in. Hypothesizing function. Just some recaps before we start analyzing data again. Some reminders that behaviors can be tools or barriers, right? Not all behaviors are bad, right? Or even, I don't see behaviors as good or bad. They're just tools. They're something that we have learned to use to get our needs met. And so if we have, for instance, great communication skills and we're able to just say, hey, you know, I'm hungry right now and I'm wondering if I could get some cereal or whatever, or could you make me something to eat or whatever, then I wouldn't have to cry or scream or hit or kick or all of those things. Those are just tools. If I can't use that language, but I can cry and someone gives me food and my need is met, I learned that crying is a very effective tool, right? And so the behavior can be something that you're using that's helping you. Sometimes it can be a barrier, as in, it's a tool that I'm using to get this need met, but it's actually a barrier keeping me from making friends, right? Keeping me from having my social needs met or that sort of thing. Behaviors can be destructive or constructive. They can build something, they can tear something down. Some things need to be torn down, right? Some things need to be built. Not everything needs to be built, right? So we want to take away the judgment that we have about behaviors and just start looking at them very objectively. What we're talking about tonight is behaviors always have a function, a purpose, a reason, an unmet need. We talked a ton about functions in the foundational classes. So if there's anything here tonight that you're like, whoa, I'm not clear on that, just remember to go back. One of our first foundational classes was on the functions, how to find the functions, right? Or on identifying the functions. So also behaviors are influenced by environment. In one of our early classes, someone said, I feel like I'm an antecedent to my kid's behavior. And I said, yes, I invite you to consider that you're an antecedent to every one of your kids' behaviors if you're in the room. If you're present, you're an antecedent. And whether it's a behavior that you really enjoy and you prefer, they're saying, I love you, or they're washing their own dishes, or they're, helping their sibling with something, whether it's those behaviors, which you were antecedents for, or it's, I'm not picking up my dish and I'm making a rude comment, or I'm hitting someone, you're also an antecedent for that, right? And so it's just recognizing that you're always an antecedent, because everything that happens is influenced by the environment and you're part of the environment. I'm not saying you're the only antecedent. I'm not saying, oh, everything's your fault. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying recognize that you are one of the variables in the room, as is the temperature and the lighting and the sound and the smell and other people and hunger and who knows, right? So behavior is influenced by all of these things. When we talk about the functions of behavior, we really brought it down to three main categories. We have access, escape, and that's including avoidance. And there's a subtle difference that we'll talk about. Just a quick recap. And then there's automatic reinforcement. Access. When we talk about access as a function of behavior, we're talking about access to preferred experiences. I need it. I want it. I need it. That want, need, that doesn't matter to me. I just assume that everything is a need, therefore it removes my judgment about the matter. If you go down that debate of do they want it or do they need it, you've put yourself as a judge of the situation. And I used to do that. I used to be like, oh, well, is it a want or is it a need? Right? Do they want to be moving around or does their body really need it? Are they really hungry? Right? Or whatever. Are they doing that on purpose? Or that kind of stuff? I just get rid of that layer. And now I'm just they need it. Right? So when I go from that, now I can look at what's happening without my own perception and judgment about it. So access is just, I need it. Are we talking about something tangible? Access can mean something tangible like food, toy, a person. When we say, oh, they need attention, we're talking about access to a person. That would be the function, right? Access to the attention of mom. Access to the attention of dad. Access to the attention of sibling, teacher, whoever, right? Access to a person, okay? An intangible item would be the thing in the middle, right? Access to attention. Attention is not a tangible item. You can only receive attention by going through a person, right? So what they really want access is to the person. Sensory. You want to feel warm, so you put on a jacket. What you really want access to is the jacket, but see how it's paired with it's because I want to get warm, right? So it's the intangible item that is the access there. Comfort, same thing. Or you want to get warm? Do you want to get full? Or need, right? So access is all about getting something that you prefer. Escape tends to be from non-preferred experiences, right? What do you want to escape from? Non-preferred experiences. I didn't add in avoidance here. Escape and avoidance are very subtle, but they can kind of be looked at in the same way. Escape is I'm in the middle of something and I want to get out of it. Avoidance is I see something coming that I don't want to be a part of. And so I'm going to do something now to prevent it from ever happening, right? So avoidance is preventative and escape is, I'm in and I got to get out, okay? So I need to get away from it, whatever that it is. And sometimes some of us want to get that it, and some of us want to get out of that it because we don't all have the same preferences. There are some people who would love to go to a concert and get down in a mosh pit and jump around, and they're like that. Yes, that's their thing. They'll do anything for it. And I'm like, whoa, that many people touching me, that close to me, right? It's all a matter of preference, what the it is. So don't always think about things through your preference. Really got to get objectively in looking at escape. It can be a tangible item. I don't want to eat my green beans, right? Our broccoli, our Brussels sprouts, it tends to be our green vegetables. They don't send off those happy little vibes that we like so much, right? They can also be a little bitter on our taste buds. It could be a person. We don't always enjoy everyone. There might be people we actually would prefer not to see that we find aversive. Some of that stuff is paired. Well, it's all paired, right? With experiences. It could also be an intangible item. It could be something sensory you're trying to get away from. Noises. If there's really loud noises, you might see an escape behavior if somebody wants to get away from that noise, right? lights, temperature, things like that. A lot of times it's a task. We see there's a task somebody wants to get away from. I don't want to do my homework. I don't want to cut the grass. I don't want to cook dinner. I don't want to pick up my room. I don't want to take a shower. I don't want to, right? They tend to be these task related things that we want to escape. When I say want, I mean need. It's all the same to me. There's no difference. Then we have automatic reinforcement. Excuse me. We have automatic reinforcement, which is more internal. It's something is happening in the body. The behavior itself is observable, right? There might be rocking. I can see that, right? But there's not an antecedent pattern. When you look at antecedents, it occurs across all conditions, including what we call the alone condition, meaning if left alone, it occurs. If I don't give them a demand, if I don't give them attention, I don't do anything, I just leave this person right there by themselves, it still occurs, right? That's an automatically reinforced type of thing. So no consequential patterns, meaning when I'm looking at it, it doesn't matter what I do afterwards, it doesn't change it. Nothing, it still occurs just the same as always, right? It's often stimulatory. It's something that's going on to stimulate some system in the body. And it's often regulatory. Just like the rocking can be very grounding and regulatory to the body. Flapping, hitting, biting, pinching, all sorts of things that self-injurious to the body can be automatically reinforced. Kids who pica, meaning that they eat inedible objects, that can be automatically reinforced. Different sounds, like kids are screaming or making noises or things like that, that's something in there. The noise that they're making can be automatically reinforced. Kids who won't keep on their clothes, or they can't touch certain things, or they want to touch certain things, that's all part of that automatic reinforcement. How do we find the function, right? Well, we collect and analyze ABC data. The antecedent is what's happening or what just happened prior to the behavior. Behavior is what the behavior looks like in observable, measurable terms. And the consequence is what happened right after the behavior was exhibited. All of this is review from previous classes, but let's get freshened up for this. A couple of reminders, or a few reminders about ABC data. ABC data attempts to explore a cause and effect relationship between behaviors, right? It relies on qualified data, not quantified data. Quantified means frequency, rate, duration, intensity. Well, ABC data is qualified. It is us translating what we see, right, onto or into a sort of anecdotal log, and then we look for patterns in our translations of the behaviors that we see, right? So there's a lot of subjectivity in there, but we're finding ways to take that qualified data and put it into a more quantified form so we can analyze it and look for correlations. It doesn't prove functional relationships. It doesn't say this is the cause of this, or this is the effect of this. It just says, oh, look at this coincidental pattern. I see a correlation. When this happens, this tends to happen. Not this happens because this happens. They just tend to happen. When one happens, the other happens, right? So just the whole point being that when we talk about function, that's why we're not determining function, proving function, deciding function. We're hypothesizing function, because all we can do is look at patterns that we find and give our best guess based on the variables that we have, which we know we can't say are causal, right? So we can only hypothesize function and then go from there. So, that's bright. Picking up the case study from last week. If you have no idea what you're looking at, you haven't watched last week's video yet, go back and take a look. Remember, we're doing these case studies in order. So last week we found patterns, and here we are. We're picking up with a tentative ABC pattern that we've established from all of the data we took from the class before and the class before. Remember, we had this little person, Jay, who was having struggles transitioning from video games. And so after we took all of our ABC data and we took it for about 6 weeks worth, right? We then analyzed that and we took it down into these even more finite patterns, tentative patterns that we think we see. And then we took more data on that. And so here's what we ended up with. Our antecedent patterns were transitioning from a video game to a task, which we defined as something less than preferred, right? Then we had transition from video game to other play, which we identified as activities that were typically preferred by Jay. And then we had the other antecedent, because we had escalating stuff happening. One of our antecedents was when the video game was turned off or unplugged. And then it rolled into those behaviors showing that we had an escalating scenario, right? So some of the behaviors that Jay exhibited when he was asked to transition were he continued playing, he had verbal refusals. When it escalated into mom turning it off, he yelled and screamed and growled. And then down to he clutched the game, like physical toward the game and things like that. And then the consequences would be if he kept playing or he said no, she would turn it off. He'd get some of her verbal attention. She was having a little back and forth, if you guys remember. And then she would have to physically prompt him. And then you'll see on consequences, there's a 4 and 5. After the end of all of that, the original demand still had to be met, or still was met. Mom didn't remove any of those original demands, right? And so, and a consequence after the attention or after the prompt was, he still had to do the task. He still got to do the preferred item or activity. Okay? And sometimes he even got a greater preferred item and activity. Remember the ice cream cone after that last refusal, right? So those were the tentative patterns we established. And then we took a bunch of data collection. And then we calculated that data collection. We did all of that last week, okay? So here we're just bringing it forward again so that we can pick up where we left off. Because we found some patterns. We found a pattern here, and that's the whole point. We're looking for a consequential pattern, right? And so what we found from the data collection, remember this is what we did. We said if it was a plus, and we don't see that in front of us anymore because we calculated, now we just see our percentages. So when mom asked him to transition from a video game to a task, only 14.2% of the time did he just do it. 42.9% of the time, she had to come over and turn it off, right? And then another 42.9% of the time, she had to go the next step of physically prompting him, right? So that was what happened whenever she asked him to transition from a video game to a task. But way back in our initial, I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, we were talking about finding these patterns, and we were talking about, is there anything more we'd like to know? And we decided that we would like to know what sort of task he was being asked to transition to, not just he was being asked to turn it off. Because we thought there was more to it than just turning off the game. Especially once we saw that sometimes it was fine and sometimes it wasn't. And so then we really wanted to look at, was there something more there? And this data showed us that there is something more there. Because when he's asked to transition from video game to play, he's doing it 75% of the time. Not all the time, but 75%. And look at that compared to 14.2, that's a huge difference. That tells us there is something here. There is a difference in these two. And then when he was asked to transition and play 75% of the time, he did it. And then another 16.7, she had to come turn it off. But only 8.3 did she have to actually physically prompt him to move away from the game and onto the next thing, right? This tells us a ton for planning purposes. I don't want to get ahead of myself in the slides. So this is what we were just talking about, but I tweaked the table itself just a little to make it more clear, rolling into our next step. The consequence here was the terminal consequence, meaning how did this whole event end? This whole event ended in a task. This whole event ended in play. Okay? That's the place where you start to find your function. So, according to this, 14.2% of his successful transitions ended in a task. 75% of his successful transitions ended in play. Right? That tells me he's discriminating. Okay? Where'd we go? All right, y'all. Pause for a second because it did that thing that it does sometimes where it skips a slide. But that's all right. We're back. Now, possible functional hypotheses. For all the data that we've collected on that case study from the last several weeks took us to here. When Jay is playing video games, we want to say, what is the antecedent in our functional hypotheses? We want all three pieces, the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence, right? When Jay is playing video games and is asked to turn the game off, he verbally and physically refuses in order to avoid transitioning to a less preferred activity. Right? I want you to notice, if we go back to our functions and we talk about access, escape or avoidance, and automatic reinforcement, well, we can rule out automatic reinforcement, right? Because conditions matter here. He has to have access to the game. Like, it's not something he has access to across all conditions. Conditions matter. So we're down to, is it access or is it escape avoidance? And I think naturally we want to go to, oh, it's access. He doesn't want to stop playing the game. That's why he's giving these big behaviors. Well, that's true. I don't think he wants to stop playing the game, right? But why is 75% of the time he transitions just fine? Why is it, right? And it's because he's transitioning from something that he prefers just as much. Okay? So when he's asked to transition to something that he doesn't prefer as much, that he doesn't like, or it's a task, that's when those refusals are bigger. So the actual function of the refusal is more driven by the avoidance of what's to come than maintaining the current condition. I know that's a little twisty, right? Remember, this is the advanced bundle. We're going to look at things from a lot of shifty perspectives. This one also, though, if you roll down into the next function, it's going to catch it either way. But at the end, after I talk about this one, I'll say why it's important to tweak out those subtleties and difference. When Jay is playing video games and is asked to turn the game off, he verbally and physically refuses in order to continue accessing the game as his preferred activity. There is a piece of that. He just loves the game and he wants to keep playing. So that piece is there, accessing the activity. But it's important to note that there is a discrepancy between when he's accessing another preferred activity, he'll turn the game off and transition. But when he's asked to transition to something he doesn't prefer, going to school, right? Something that's less desirable, brushing your teeth, going to bed, then he has a much larger likelihood of saying no and refusing. Okay, and so that's why that's listed as one of the first functional hypotheses, and you can have both. If I were doing an FBA, a functional behavior assessment, I would definitely be giving both of these functional hypotheses for this situation. And the reason it's so important to tease them out like this, you're going to discover next week, because we're going to go into behavior intervention plans, behavior plans, how do we start modifying, and we make function-based plans. And if the only thing we address here is that second function, he wants to keep playing, we're going to continue to have behaviors, escape behaviors, avoidance behaviors to keep from going to that activity he doesn't want to go to. So you're tending to this little piece, but you're missing this whole piece, right? So it's important to note that both of those pieces are happening there. And according to the data that we just looked at, it's happening more to avoid than it is to just let go of. Okay? And that wraps up our case study that we've done up till now. So at this point, everyone should have had their case studies all the way up to this point. All we're doing at this point is taking all the data that we have and turning it into a functional hypothesis. So right here is one for avoidance and for access. We're gonna do a few more and just go through a given ABC data patterns, which we learned how to do in the last two advanced classes. How do we go from there to what are we looking for? What are those little consequential things that let us know, oh, here's the function that we're looking at. Analysis samples. So if this is our sample ABC data pattern, and this is completely sample data, we're not going to go through everything we did in the first two classes. We're just taking you where the last class ended. Okay, we have identified ABC data patterns. You learned how to do that in the last 2 weeks. So this is where we are this week. Given that pattern that you've learned how to do, what's the antecedent patterns? What's the behavioral patterns? What are the consequential patterns? Okay, here we are. If this is what this right here is what we've determined. We have an antecedent pattern across all conditions. There's no pattern identified in the antecedent to this behavior. The behavior is bite, self, choose inedible objects. Okay. The consequence is to remove inedible objects. Prompt edible foods or chewable items. All right. When self-biting is interrupted or object is removed, bites others. Okay. This is what we're looking at. So across all conditions, no patterns identified for biting self, chewing inedible objects. Whenever I have no pattern in the antecedents, I automatically go to, is this an automatically reinforced behavior? Right? And so we have bite self, choose inedible objects is across all conditions. I'm thinking automatic reinforcement. There's nothing here for me to think otherwise, right? But then that second one, when self-biting is interrupted or object is removed, that has a set of conditions. The conditions are when self-biting is interrupted or object is removed, then the person bites others. The consequences, the inedible objects are removed, but when that is interrupted or the object is removed, then they bite the removal or the interrupter, the remover or the interrupter. Okay, we got that, right? So what are the possible functional hypotheses? And apparently this person's name is G, right? G bites self and inedible objects across all conditions in order to gain access to automatic reinforcement. We don't know what is reinforcing about that. That's part of what's difficult when we're doing the planning piece, which is next week. That's part of what's difficult with automatic reinforcement is we can't actually observe the reinforcing piece. Something is happening inside of the body, you know? I've chewed on a pen from time to time. It's not edible, right? What's that about? What's that about? It's something inside of the body is being stimulated, regulated, automatically reinforced, okay? Then the second piece is when self-biting or inedible object is blocked, G bites others in order to escape removal of automatic reinforcement. This was a little bit like the last one, that it's a subtle difference between the side of the coin, where we could have said G bites others in order to continue to access automatic reinforcement, right? But here's the subtle difference in this one and why I would say it's not to continue to access, it's to keep you from removing my access, because the behavior is pointed toward you, the external, and because I'm not just walking around biting others, right? If part of that conditions were what happened, if I'm just sitting there and somebody walks up and bites me, that's them trying to access their automatic reinforcement. But if somebody's sitting there biting themselves and I come over and I block that and then they try to bite me, they're not biting me for automatic reinforcement, to access automatic reinforcement. They're biting to escape me, to get me out of the way. I want to get away from that blocking hand. I want to get away from that interrupter. How do I get something to get away from my mouth? I bite it. I already have a superpower there, right? I'm working on it all the time. I'm going to use the tool that works. Sometimes we use the same behavior for multiple things, and this is one of those cases where I would come to this in my functional analysis, or my functional hypothesis, sorry. I would come to, okay, first of all, they're biting themselves and others. They're biting to get automatic reinforcement, and then they're biting to get away from you blocking them. Okay? I know that one can be a little twisty. Here's our last sample ABC data pattern. Antecedents. While family is eating dinner, watching TV, or other family activity. Behavior, calls names, makes other rude comments to family members. Consequence, adult reprimands. That's your pattern there. While family is eating dinner, watching TV, or other family activity, that's when it's starting. What is it that's happening? They're calling names. They're saying you're fat, you're ugly, you're stupid, they're making these quotations means, and what I'm communicating by my use of the quotations is that these words are subjective in nature and they mean a little something different to every interpreter, right? So when I say calls names, I might think that means one thing, you might think that means something else, but loosely, you know that I mean that they're identifying someone in a way or calling someone something that feels negative in some way, makes other rude comments. There's a lot of judgment in what's rude and what's not rude. And some things I've literally seen a kid say one thing to their parent exactly like this, blah, blah, blah. And that parent is like, oh my God, that's so rude. And blah, 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 blah. Well, you see how to deal with this is like they don't take anything. It's like so subjective what's a rude comment and what's not. Right? It just means it's open for interpretation. It's not concrete. So then you have, they basically are calling names and making these rude comments. And then the consequence is the adult is asking them to stop or giving them a reprimand or having a conversation or going into this long bouts of adult, right, verbalization to discuss this issue. Adult reprimands. And then the other thing you have here is same kid, while washing dishes, cutting the lawn, or other household chore. So the antecedent for this behavior is during some sort of chore type activity, some sort of task. They accidentally, because there's no way to tell what was an accident and what was intentional, but this happens a lot, right? They accidentally break their materials when doing chores. They're doing dishes, there are always dishes that are broken in the process. When it's their turn to do dishes, you can guarantee there's going to be 2 to 5 dishes that accidentally get broken. And so accidentally you don't know is like what needs to happen here, but something accidentally gets broken, right? Or something. And then the consequence for that is they either escape the chore, because if you break something every time, then you stop getting asked to do it, or they have increased adult supervision. So one of those two things is happening. On the short term, the immediacy is escaping the chore. And then over time, this person's parents have discovered they need to increase their supervision in order to not have everything broken, right? So where do we go from there with this stuff? Let me move my face out of y'all's way. So possible functional hypotheses for this. During family social opportunities, that's what I would call those dinner, games, interactions, family social opportunities. I try to take it down into like, how can I put this in a category that we can broadly interpret? During family social opportunities, Y makes rude or otherwise inappropriate verbal comments in order to access the attention of their family members. Right? It was, here's the antecedent, here's the behavior, here's the consequence. The consequence that keeps showing up is what you hypothesize the function to be. What kept showing up? Adult reprimands, right? Verbal. So in order to access the attention of their family members, there's the function, access the attention of their family members. And then the second one, while completing household tasks, domestic chores, age-appropriate domestic chores, like however specific you want to be here. Are you just doing it for yourself at home? Or are you doing it for your school system? How specific do you want to be here? While completing household domestic chores, Y breaks task materials in order to escape the task, primarily, right? That seems to be, that's the immediacy, that's what happens. But something else also happens here that's important and long-term important. This has resulted in increased adult supervision for tasks, which creates the potential for a chained function to adult attention, right? This can happen with any behavior that you have. It can happen with automatic reinforcement. Gosh, we see this all the time with automatic reinforcement. Something starts out with one function. I did this to escape, but this thing also happened. And if you look at function number 1 here, we already have the kid doing some things to get more adult attention. I'm using this tool over here to get more adult attention. I use this tool to get out of this job, but guess what? It also got me more adult attention. It's a win, double win, right? So something got chained. It wasn't the intention, wasn't the original hypothesized function, but because this other thing kept happening with it, it's gonna become harder and harder to tell which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? The escape or the attention, because now they're both happening at the same time. But now the attention is preventing the escape. And so maybe, right? So it can get really twisty in there. So you want to look at what's the immediate consequence and what's happening long range, long term. Am I responding appropriately here, but giving a whole bunch down the line? If so let's say like they escape is the immediate consequence, but it rolls into like, let's say they're at school and they do something and they get removed from the classroom. And so the immediate consequence is escape. But then you find out that, well, first the teacher talked to them in the hallway, and then they went and talked to like some other specialist in the school. And then they went up to the principal and talked to somebody there. But then the nurse saw them on the way, so they stopped and checked on them. And then the nurse talked to them. And then the secretary was like, hey, how's it going? And they talked to them. And then they get up to the office and they call mom or dad and they talk to them. And then mom or dad picks them up and they talk to them again. And then they get home and probably grandma knows about it by now. Right? So you have to watch that attention piece. You have to watch it. You have to watch it. You have to watch it. Most of the chains that you see will chain attention. Sometimes you see the other way around where like I'm doing something for attention, but I recognize that it provided me with escape. And so I'm going to do it more. That might be if you're in a classroom and you have that kid who just likes to talk and to get you on these long tangents that go off for 20 minutes. That might not be for attention, right? Maybe it started that way, but now it's chained and it's for escape. Or maybe it is for attention, but just by the sake of their happiness, good grace, they get escape, right? So one thing can chain to another thing. All right, that's a lot. That takes us to the end of our data collection, our data analysis, and our functional hypotheses. We are ready for behavior intervention planning. So that's going to come next week. Bring your functional hypotheses. We are going to dig deep into how to take this and turn it into a contingency-based positive reinforcement plan, how to adjust those plans as we go along, how to monitor them for success and make adjustments. So, all right, I will see you guys next week. Have a good night.